Welcome back to Open Matters, the podcast that talks about open source matters that matter. And today we're traveling to Denmark, a country with a fascinating and at times turbulent relationship with open source. Nearly 20 years ago, Denmark tried to legislate for open standards and open source in public administration. It was bold, it was disruptive, and it triggered some very powerful resistance from proprietary vendors. And for a while, the movement stalled. But today, something different is happening. Denmark is experiencing a kind of second wave of open source, quieter, more pragmatic, and perhaps far more successful. At the centre of a lot of this work is Magenta, one of Denmark's most established open source companies, and its CEO, Morten Kjærsgaard. Morten has been advocating for open source in Denmark since the early 2000s. He helped found the original Danish Open Source Vendors Association. His company now builds and maintains open source solutions for public bodies across Denmark, Greenland, and Scandinavia. And what I found especially interesting in our conversation was Morten's sharings about how open source companies across Europe, from France to Germany to the UK to Denmark, increasingly collaborate to offer truly sovereign, interoperable, vendor-neutral solutions. It's a reminder that digital sovereignty isn't about going it alone as a nation, it's about controlling where you're going. Morten, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Richard. I'm very happy to be here.
Morten, you're now running a very successful open source software business based out of Denmark, 50 employees, exciting success stories. But this isn't where you started. Could you just let us know a little bit about your journey and how did you get involved in the open source software movement?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. The fact is that I'm educated in political science and power studies and economics. And I had my small company just myself 27 years ago. I was editing websites. I was doing communication stuff. And then one of my clients, the European Commission's representation in Copenhagen, they asked me to develop a content management system. They had this supplier of a content management system, and they liked the system, but they really didn't like the supplier. There was no service at all. And then they said, well, we've tried to buy this content management system from the supplier, but that's not possible. They won't sell it to us. So Morten, couldn't you develop an open source content management system? And we're speaking in 1999 now, I think, the end of 98, 99. And I said, well, I'm not a developer. Lars, he was called Lars, the IT manager in the European Commission, Denmark then. And of course I can't. Then he said, well, we've got 60,000 euros. I said, well, that's quite some amount at the end of the month. And then I found a couple of former colleagues who could do development and also front-end and back-end development. And we created Magenta, the company that I run now. And now they're having brilliant careers, both of them. And I've been running Magenta since 2001. And I've started hiring people that are much wiser than myself, and they're able to develop. So what I do is that I try not to be too much in the way for them and do a bit of project management and a bit of overall leadership. So that's what we do. And we are approximately 50 now in the company, spread out in Denmark, between the locations in Copenhagen and Denmark's second city, Aarhus. And then we also have a daughter company in Greenland, in Nuuk, where, by the way, I'm traveling next Monday to visit clients up there.
So that was back in 1999. Perhaps you could say the EU Commission, their representation in Copenhagen was quite forward-thinking. They were asking you to produce open source software 26 years ago. Yeah,
in fact, it's quite funny that this was only 2 or 3 years after the open source notion was coined by Eric Raymond. I think that was 96. So I didn't know anything about open source, but I felt sympathy from the very beginning of the very notion of open source, the openness, the idea of not protecting stuff behind licenses. And I saw that this business model could work. I really had the idea that this was possible. And when looking at especially the United States at that point, I knew that there were already then businesses working with open source and where the business model worked. So I decided to take that challenge upon myself and my colleagues. And slowly, but too in my point of view, too slowly, we managed to build an open source company. And today I'm very proud that we've established a company where more than half of our income comes from from recurring revenue. So that's also quite unique in Denmark. Denmark is not an open source country. On the contrary, I think we're the country most penetrated by Microsoft. So it's quite a kind of a challenge to do so in Denmark. But I'm optimistic. I've been that for 26 years now, and I still am.
Because you didn't only found an open source company. In 2003, you also went on to co-found OSL. I shan't try and pronounce it. The Danish Association of Open Source Vendors. How do we say that? What is leverandør?
In Danish, it's called Open Source Leverandørforeningen. Leverandørforening. It's terrible.
Excellent. Well, there we go. There's our Danish lessons for the day. So, as you say, you were quite positive about this, quite optimistic. So what was the idea behind the OSL? What were you hoping?
Yeah, when we originally created OSL, we were 4 in the board at that time. The idea was that no one really knew what open source was on the decision maker level. So we needed to tell the world or tell Denmark what open source was. And we thought that the easiest way was to create a business association. And in a couple of years, we had, I think, 20 members, 25 perhaps members of that business association. And we really had some great gains and successes in my point of view, because what we managed to do was that we managed to create attention in the political level. And I worked together with quite a few parliamentarians, and we succeeded in passing a legislation on open standards in 2006, only 3 years after the creation of that business association. Also legislation that was passed in the Danish parliament unanimously. But then the devil is in the detail and in the implementation. So even though we got this set of 7 standards on document formats, on websites, on many things, and also on invoices in Denmark, it never really took off, because in the implementation period, we were met by a lot of power the other way around from Microsoft, especially Microsoft. We were having some very big battles in Danish standards. Danish standards is the organization that has to implement the various standards that are decided by the parliament. And they're the various organizations, they got cold feet, because Microsoft said, well, if you're going to implement open standards, you're going to lose so much efficiency in the public sector in Denmark, because we're the only company delivering efficiency with our products. So please don't do that for your own sake. And people got scared, and it fell apart. And that's more or less why I, in 2010, decided that I should focus on my company instead of focusing on politics, because I got a bit, I got a bit depressed regarding these issues, I have to admit.
That sounds difficult to push back against when there's someone with that kind of lobbying power that you're up against.
Yeah, I couldn't compete with that. We were only a couple of persons in that board, and they could send in as many persons as they wanted to, and they did on various political levels. Yeah.
So what lessons did you take away from this first initial optimism of the open source movement in Denmark? And what perhaps might you have done differently? Or do you think really with the cards you had, you did the best you could?
What I decided to do in 2010, when I resigned as a chairman for the Open Source Business Association, the first Open Source Business Association, I wanted to show, not tell. I wanted to show that it was possible to run an open source company in real life. And I think we were 10 on the payroll back in 2010 when I terminated my first period as chairman of an open source business association. And in the following 5 to 7 years, the company grew to 30, from 10 to 30. So I felt that I had proven right in making that choice, returning to business full time, because I spent half time doing business when I was chairman and half time doing politics. And it felt good doing business again, 100%. And we gained a lot of clients, mainly public sector clients, municipalities, regions, and state sector clients. And we really built a business during those years. And when we met the New Year's Eve 24, we are approximately 50 on the payroll now. So I think that was the right decision. But I must also admit that I missed politics. I missed also the business politics a bit.
But you didn't stay out of politics for very long, and you later founded the DOSL.
In 25, in May 25, just a couple of months ago, yeah.
So that's really quite recently. So what happened there?
Yeah, but I think what happened everywhere in the world was that when Donald Trump, and I'm sorry to mention him, I'm going to mention him a couple of times during this interview, I think, when he came into office, and especially J.D. Vance's Munich speech and their treatment of Zelensky in the White House, the first meeting they had there, it meant that I think we all had to face that the world had changed. We have to stop relying on big tech, and especially also all the pictures with the big tech companies supporting Trump in the inauguration ceremony. It was disgusting to watch. And it also meant that the politicians in Europe, they made a decision. And what is different now from previously is that this time the decision is attached to also a military decision. It's no longer just big tech, it's big tech and defense. And when you combine those two things, things get powerful. So that's why I'm much more optimistic this time than I were the last time I created an open source business association. This is going to last. Things have changed. And the European companies and the European public sector, these organizations, they really want to get less dependent upon big tech from US. Digital sovereignty is a big notion. And what is it? Digital sovereignty, I mean, there are so many definitions on that. But one thing is sure, we do not want to be depending so much upon big tech from US that we are today. We have to do and to see changes now.
So I don't normally see lots of Danish news in my newsfeed, but earlier this year, I guess about the time that you were talking about founding DOSL, I started to see increasing amounts, PC Mag saying Denmark wants to dump Microsoft software for Linux, or Computing UK, Denmark's digital ministry shifts from Microsoft to LibreOffice in push for sovereignty and savings. And I increasingly saw a lot of these headlines, which really quite surprised me. How much of this is real? Is it just hype? What's going on? Is the news media accurately reporting the general sentiment in Denmark?
I think they're reporting the general sentiment in Denmark. This is the sentiment. The sentiment is that we have to get rid of Microsoft in many places, and we have to create another digital infrastructure than a digital infrastructure based on big tech. It's not only Microsoft; it's also Amazon and Google, of course, and other the big tech US companies. So the sentiment is right, but I think some of the public sector organizations and the leaderships there, they panicked. They felt the pressure, and they also felt that we have to do something now. And then they started celebrating small shifts. I think one of the larger municipalities moved away. They moved some small systems that all in all counted for 0.001% of the IT expenses in the municipality, but they celebrated as a big thing that they now had moved these small systems to Hetzner in Germany, away from Azure Cloud and to Hetzner in Germany. I don't mind celebrating stuff, but things can become too small. And what I would have suggested instead was that we started out identifying where the largest possibilities are to gain some results fast, and we start out with cold minds and analysis instead of just doing stuff. I like the notion of doing stuff, but we have to do stuff based on just some kind of analysis. And in my point of view, we did things too fast. And the reason also I'm a bit afraid of this is that when we then have to face that things are not moving in the right direction as fast as we want, we get disappointed. And when we get disappointed, we have a tendency to to turn around and say, well, it didn't work. Let's return to the well-known world we had before. And we cannot do that. We shouldn't do that. So that's why I don't really like the headlines I read in the international newspapers now.
So just to help people understand what you mean by doing things well, you shared a couple of interesting sounding success stories with me of some things that are working well in your Citizens PC and things with the tax authority in Greenland. Can you just share us a bit more how that process went with these success stories?
We have some success stories in Denmark, and it would, in my point of view, be very good to take a starting point in those success stories, not only the ones that my company provides, but also in the ones that we have from, say, Germany, France, and all that, all those countries south of Denmark, where they really show that open source works. But to return to Denmark, we have a Citizens PC where we provide the software. It's open source. It's based on Ubuntu. And we often come into play when a municipality, they have experienced an insecurity incident with the keyloggers, for instance, on a library, where a citizen's social security number has been caught by people who have bad intentions. This happens on Microsoft software. And then they come to us because they've heard that we have a secure PC based on Ubuntu. And this means that right now we have this open source Citizens PC out in more than half of the Danish municipalities, where they perhaps want to renew their passports or driver's licenses. Then they meet a PC with open source software. People do not know, but this is the case. And this could have been exposed much more as one of the success stories. The same with the Greenland tax authorities. Pretty unknown case also is that we are little by little taking out modules of the monolith in Greenland of the tax authorities and replacing it with modules that are entirely open source. And it's modules for tariffs, it's modules for pension fundings, it's modules for many things. So in Greenland, we are doing what we are not allowed to do in Denmark with the tax authorities because they want big companies, big closed source companies, unfortunately. But in Greenland, they want to have local, and we have a local company in Greenland providing open source for them. So that's very interesting. It's a business case I really would like to put more exposure on if possible.
You spoke just a minute ago about needing to plan and be very careful about this. So, for example, with this Greenland tax authority system, how long has that been worked on? And how long did it take from initial discussions to having a solution that was starting to be rolled out?
Yeah, but it took a couple of years also because they needed to understand what is open source and how does it work, and is it dangerous for us to rely on open source? And when we had convinced them that, of course, we're not open sourcing the keys to the tax system. We're not open sourcing the way into the tax system. It's the building of the tax system. Whenever they understood this, then they made contracts with us. And the manager of the tax authorities in Greenland, he's a quite smart man in my point of view, because he understood this, and there has been a lot of reluctance also, I'm sure, from the Danish tax authorities, trying perhaps to convince him that this could be dangerous. But he decided to give it a go, and I'm very certain that he never regretted it. And I'm going to meet him next week in Nuuk in Greenland to discuss new projects. So we're very much in business in Greenland in ways that I hope we will be able to be in Denmark in a couple of years as well, because the Danish authorities need open source just as much as the Greenlandic authorities need it.
Another news story that has been, that you may well have seen, is the Austrian military recently migrated across to LibreOffice for their document editing needs, and that's been in the news a lot. I think what's not been in the news so much is that this process started in 2020, and for the last 5 years, I think they've been in discussions with the company that I work with Collabora Productivity.
Yeah, that's your company. Yeah, congratulations on that, Richard.
Thank you. Yeah,
really.
It's but exactly these things, they don't quite just happen. There's lots of good solutions and there's lots of people with problems, but you can't quite just bang them together. You probably want someone.
No, I entirely agree, and this just emphasizes the need for preparing and for doing hard work before announcing that now we have success. And that's also, it touches upon the things we were talking about just 10 minutes ago regarding not announcing anything too fast. So I really respect that you guys have been working with the Austrian authorities for 5 years. And we see the same in Germany, in Schleswig-Holstein. The authorities there, they've been working with open source for 7, 8 years. And that's both you, and it's your company, Richard. It's also Nextcloud. It's Open Exchange. And when you see commitment on both sides, then things are working. You have companies like your own and fellow companies in Germany and Britain and France working together with authorities, just like Schleswig-Holstein and the other 6 northern German länder. They're doing the same right now. We have to face that fact as well. It's not only Schleswig-Holstein. It's not an exception. This is going to be mainstream in Europe. It's mainstream more or less in the northern part of Germany right now. It's going to be mainstream in the southern parts of Germany. It's mainstream in Austria. And I really, really hope it would be mainstream in the Nordic countries. We provide software to not only Denmark and Greenland, but also Sweden. And I hope we're entering Norway also. And it should be mainstream. It ought to be mainstream, just like it is south of Denmark.
And to me, that seems to be one of the really exciting things about working in the open source world, because it's interesting. We're talking about digital sovereignty and we're talking about control, yet we're not saying that Denmark must have a Danish company doing something. It's much more to do with, are you in control of the system? And that only really comes with open source. But it means, like you say, that we can have things like a German file sync and share solution and an English document editor, and then a Danish company like yours can help with sticking it all together. And the end result is a system that is fully controlled and fully owned by the user.
And yeah, you hit the nail there. That's exactly what it's all about. I hear very high-level CTOs in Denmark say, well, digital sovereignty, but we cannot produce everything ourselves. They totally misunderstand what digital sovereignty is. It's not producing everything yourselves. It's not North Korea. This is not how it works. This is exactly the opposite. It's taking some very good stuff from you guys in Collabora and LibreOffice. It's taking stuff from Nextcloud. It's working together all across Europe, and also with very good American open source companies. It's not bypassing them. It's choosing open instead of closed, and that's what it's all about. It's not about producing everything yourself.
So just some final questions then as we wrap things up. What lessons do you think Denmark and other countries should be taking away from the first initial failed attempt and now this new exciting, lots of news stories, but we're not quite sure where it's going yet?
Oh, that's a very, very good and big question.
Sorry, it's a difficult question. It's very open-ended.
No, but thanks, Richard, for giving me that question. It allows me to speak for 2 hours, but I won't do that. What happened 20 years ago when the open standards legislation failed was that we got scared. And what I really want to urge to the Danish public sector, CTOs and ministers and all that, the decision level is not to be scared again, not to let yourself scare from these arguments about efficiency and insecurity and uncertainty. What's insecure and uncertain is software coming from big tech right now. It's the opposite. It's the opposite way around. We have to rely on the very good cases that we see in Europe right now. And I want the Danish decision makers to look south right now and to see that things work. And that's the way things are moving. And if you want to draw out time and not doing anything, well, be my guest. But at the end of the day, you have to make some other decisions that you've been doing for the last 25 or 30 years. You have to make a change. Otherwise, you shouldn't be in the positions that you hold right now. Then, in my point of view, you should resign and say, well, leave the job to smarter people, knowing how the world really works regarding openness, cooperation, and working across Europe.
That's a bold message.
I also hope that we'll have an ecosystem in Denmark of small and medium-sized open source companies. Also, in my point of view, it would be great to have some big open source companies, but that's not necessarily the way forward. I don't really believe in the Airbus moment where France and Germany and Britain and Spain built this big open source company that should take up the challenge with Microsoft. That's not necessarily the way to do stuff, because who should build that company? Then you have governments, and governments then don't necessarily act wisely on this. I think it's about liberal economy. It's about demand and supply. So if we see some demand from the public sector in Denmark and Europe, we're there to supply. We are many open source companies who want to supply, and we're able to supply, but we need the demand.
Well, I think our company's recently signed up to working with you more, so we're excited about being involved with that. But for now, can I just say thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been incredibly interesting hearing all of your expertise, what you've been involved with in the past, and what you're excited about for the future. So thank you so much for joining us, Morten.
And thank you, Richard, for having me.